6 months. That is how long Nancy Guthrie has been missing. Half a year has passed since the ordinary routine of one family became one of the most talked about missing person investigations in the country. During those months, there have been search teams, interviews, theories, social media debates, and countless questions. Some tips appeared promising. Others faded almost as quickly as they surfaced. Yet one question has remained exactly where it was from the very beginning. Where is Nancy Guthrie? As time passes, it becomes tempting to chase every new rumor or every fresh headline. But investigators often reach a point where they do something that surprises the public. Instead of looking farther ahead, they go back. They review every interview again, every photograph, every timeline, every phone record, every witness statement. They start asking the same questions they asked on day one, because sometimes the answer was there all along, hidden beneath details that did not seem important at the time. That brings us to today. 6 months into this investigation, many observers believe the case has quietly returned to its foundation. Not because detectives have given up, but because the basics are often where missing pieces are found. To understand where things stand today, it helps to begin where everything started. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance did not begin with flashing police lights or television cameras. Like many missing person cases, it began with an ordinary day that slowly became anything but ordinary. According to reports available at the time, Nancy's family expected her routine to continue as usual. There was nothing that publicly suggested those around her believed something dramatic was about to happen. Friends and relatives have consistently described her as someone with established habits and regular communication. Then that communication stopped. At first, there may have been ordinary explanations. Perhaps her phone battery had died. Maybe she had gone somewhere without service. Family members often wait a little while before assuming the worst because everyone has experienced delayed replies or missed calls. But hours turned into more hours. Then, an entire day. Before long, concern replaced patience. When loved ones realized they could no longer explain her absence, authorities were contacted and the search officially began. Cases like this often unfold in stages. The first stage focuses on speed. Investigators want to know where the missing person was last confirmed to be. They identify everyone who spoke with that person. They secure surveillance footage before it disappears. They preserve electronic records while they are still available. Every hour matters. Records can be overwritten. Witness memories begin fading. Businesses routinely erase surveillance footage after only days or weeks unless someone requests it quickly. Because of that, investigators typically build what they call a working timeline. That timeline becomes the backbone of the investigation. Every confirmed sighting is placed into chronological order. Every verified phone call, every text message, every financial transaction, every known movement. The goal is simple. Find the last point where the facts are certain. Everything after that becomes the mystery. According to public reporting throughout the investigation, detectives spent considerable time reconstructing Nancy's final known movements. They interviewed family members, acquaintances, and others who might have crossed paths with her. As in nearly every major missing person case, investigators also examined available digital evidence, including phone activity and other records that could help establish where she had been and when. Some information has remained confidential. That is common. Police often withhold details that only the person responsible or a credible witness would know. Doing so helps investigators evaluate future tips. If someone claims knowledge of the case, detectives can compare that person's statement against facts that have never been released publicly. To many watching from home, that silence can be frustrating. People naturally want updates. They want certainty. They want closure. But experienced investigators frequently say that not every piece of evidence should become public while an active investigation continues. As weeks passed, volunteers joined organized searches. Large areas were examined. Searchers walked fields. Wooded locations were checked. Waterways in relevant areas were considered. Search operations often involve far more planning than television viewers realize. Teams divide maps into grids. Each section is searched methodically. GPS tracking is sometimes used to ensure the same ground is not unintentionally skipped or searched twice. Despite those efforts, Publicly available information has not identified Nancy's location. That reality is one of the hardest parts for families. Searches can continue for days, weeks, or even months without providing the answers everyone hopes for. At first, that seemed straightforward. Then something unexpected happened. Public attention around the case continued growing. Television coverage expanded. Online discussions multiplied. People began comparing Nancy's disappearance to other well-known missing person cases. Amateur investigators studied photographs, maps, and interviews. Some believed they had identified overlooked clues. Others focused on body language during public appearances. Social media became filled with theories, many of them contradicting one another. This is where missing person investigations often become more complicated. Tips increase dramatically. Some are extremely helpful. Others consume valuable investigative time without leading anywhere. Law enforcement agencies routinely encourage people to report credible information while also reminding the public that speculation can unintentionally make an investigation harder. Every reported sighting must be evaluated. Every claimed witness deserves consideration. Every tip requires resources. Most ultimately lead nowhere. But investigators cannot know which one might matter until they examine it. That is why patience becomes just as important as urgency. During these 6 months, family members have continued asking the public for help. Their message has remained remarkably consistent. If you know something, come forward. Even information that seems small may become important when combined with something else. Experienced detectives often describe investigations as puzzles. Rarely does one dramatic clue solve everything. Instead, dozens of ordinary facts slowly begin fitting together. A receipt, a license plate, a security camera, a phone call, a remembered conversation. Each piece may seem insignificant on its own. Together, they can reveal a much larger picture. That would have been the end of it. But another detail stood out. As more time passed without definitive answers, investigators reportedly continued reviewing material they had already collected. To people outside law enforcement, that might sound repetitive. In reality, it is standard investigative practice. The first review looks for obvious connections. The second review asks different questions. The third review often happens after new information changes the meaning of something collected months earlier. A witness statement that appeared unimportant in January may suddenly make sense after a new interview conducted in April. That is one reason experienced investigators rarely discard information completely. They archive it. They revisit it. They compare old evidence against new evidence. Cases have been solved years later because someone noticed a detail that everyone else had previously overlooked. Another factor influencing investigations, like Nancy's, is the passage of time itself. People remember conversations differently. Someone who initially believed an event happened on Tuesday may later realize it actually occurred on Wednesday after checking a calendar or finding an old photograph. Digital records sometimes clarify those memories. Sometimes they raise additional questions. Records show only that a phone connected to a tower. They do not necessarily explain why someone was there or what happened next. Likewise, surveillance footage may capture a vehicle entering an area without recording where it went afterward. Investigators must connect those fragments carefully. According to law enforcement professionals who have spoken generally about long-running missing person investigations, returning to the basics often signals persistence rather than frustration. It means detectives are testing every assumption. Was every interview complete? Was every location searched under the right conditions? Did every witness remember everything the first time? Is there someone who was afraid to speak months ago but may now be willing? These questions become increasingly important as time goes on. Families also experience time differently. For the public, 6 months may feel like one chapter in a news story. For loved ones, every single day is measured differently. Birthdays arrive, holidays pass. Family gatherings include an empty chair. Phones remain close by in case they finally ring. Hope changes shape over time, but it does not necessarily disappear. That emotional reality often drives families to continue speaking publicly, even when there are no major developments to announce. They understand something investigators have said repeatedly over the years in many cases. People talk, relationships change, secrets become harder to keep. Someone who stayed silent in the beginning may eventually decide they can no longer carry what they know. That possibility is one reason investigators rarely consider a missing person investigation truly inactive, even when public updates become less frequent. Today, 6 months after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, the investigation appears to be standing on its original foundation once again. The confirmed timeline, the verified evidence, the documented interviews, the physical searches, the digital records, everything is being viewed through fresh eyes. Whether that process uncovers the answer everyone has been waiting for remains uncertain. But history has shown that some investigations make their greatest progress not by chasing the newest theory, but by returning to the oldest facts and asking one simple question. What, if anything, did everyone miss the first time? When an investigation reaches the 6-month mark, the work often looks very different from those frantic first days. The flashing lights are gone. The search helicopters are no longer overhead. Television crews move on to newer stories. But behind the scenes, investigators are usually doing some of their most important work. That brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions about missing person cases. Many people assume that if there are no daily updates, very little is happening. In reality, detectives often spend weeks reviewing records, conducting follow-up interviews, consulting specialists, and comparing evidence that was collected months earlier. That process is rarely dramatic. It is patient. It is repetitive. And sometimes it uncovers details that only become meaningful with time. According to publicly available information, authorities have continued treating Nancy Guthrie's disappearance as an active investigation. While officials have not released every aspect of their work, the case has remained open, and they have continued encouraging anyone with credible information to come forward. That public request is significant. Investigators do not ask for additional information unless they believe someone, somewhere, may still have a piece of the puzzle. But 6 months also creates another challenge. Memories fade, people move, phones are replaced. Businesses rotate employees. Someone who noticed an unfamiliar vehicle in the neighborhood may no longer remember exactly what day they saw it. Someone who believed a conversation was unimportant may struggle to recall the exact words months later. That is why detectives document interviews so carefully from the beginning. The written reports become a snapshot of what witnesses remembered before time began changing those memories. Then something unexpected happened. As discussions surrounding Nancy's disappearance continued online, several competing theories began taking shape. Some people believed she had left voluntarily. Others argued that possibility made little sense based on what had been publicly reported. Another group focused on the possibility of foul play. Others questioned whether someone outside Nancy's immediate circle could have been involved. The truth is that investigators often consider numerous possibilities simultaneously. They cannot afford to become attached to one explanation too early. Experienced detectives know confirmation bias can become dangerous. If every new piece of information is viewed through only one theory, important evidence pointing in another direction can be missed. Instead, investigators generally ask a different question. What do the verified facts actually support? That distinction matters. Verified facts are different from assumptions. A verified fact might be a confirmed phone call, a confirmed surveillance image, a documented financial transaction, a timestamp supported by electronic records. An assumption fills in the gaps between those facts. Sometimes assumptions turn out to be correct. Sometimes they lead investigators away from the truth. Because of that, long-running investigations often involve separating evidence from interpretation again and again. One area that continues attracting public attention in many missing person cases is digital evidence. Phones have become incredibly important investigative tools. They record locations. They preserve messages. They store photographs. They connect people through calls, applications, and social media. But digital evidence also has limits. A phone can stop transmitting because the battery dies. It can lose service. It can be damaged. It can also be intentionally turned off. Each possibility creates a different investigative path. Records may show the last time a device connected to a network. That information helps establish a timeline, but it does not automatically explain what happened afterward. Investigators must combine those records with every other piece of available evidence. That includes witness interviews, vehicle movements, known travel routes, and physical searches. At first, that seemed straightforward, but another detail stood out. Witnesses do not always realize the value of what they know. Someone might remember seeing a familiar vehicle, but dismiss it because nothing seemed unusual at the time. Another person may recall hearing an argument weeks before the disappearance, but never mention it because they assumed it had nothing to do with the case. Months later, those same observations can become far more important. That is why investigators frequently conduct follow-up interviews. The questions may sound familiar. The answers sometimes change, not because witnesses are dishonest, but because memory works differently over time. One recollection triggers another. A photograph refreshes someone's memory. A calendar helps place events in the correct order. Small corrections can strengthen the overall timeline. Cases involving missing adults also require investigators to balance privacy with public awareness. Authorities cannot always release every investigative step. Doing so could compromise interviews or alert someone who is under scrutiny. That silence often leads to speculation. People begin asking whether investigators have suspects, whether someone has failed a polygraph, whether forensic evidence has been found. In many cases, officials simply decline to answer. Their refusal should not automatically be interpreted one way or the other. It often reflects the reality that protecting an active investigation takes priority over satisfying public curiosity. Meanwhile, Nancy's family has continued living through something that few people can fully understand. Every morning begins with uncertainty. Every evening ends without the answers they hoped would arrive during the day. For families of missing persons, daily routines never completely return to normal. Simple activities become reminders. An empty driveway. A birthday left uncelebrated. A favorite chair that remains untouched. Even ordinary sounds, a phone notification, a knock at the door, can briefly raise hope before reality settles back in. That emotional weight is difficult to measure. It also explains why families continue making public appeals months after a disappearance. They know one person may still hold the information investigators need. History provides many examples where critical witnesses came forward long after a case first made headlines. Sometimes relationships changed. Sometimes guilt became overwhelming. Sometimes people finally recognized that what they had seen months earlier was far more important than they realized. Investigators count on that possibility. That would have been the end of it. But another question continued resurfacing. Why return to the beginning after 6 months? The answer lies in experience. Detectives know that major breakthroughs often come from revisiting old evidence with new perspective. Suppose investigators receive a fresh tip identifying a particular location. They immediately compare that location against every existing record. Did Nancy's phone ever connect nearby? Did surveillance cameras capture traffic in that area? Did witnesses mention it previously? Was it already searched? If so, under what conditions? Ground searches conducted during heavy vegetation may produce different results from searches conducted after seasonal changes. Likewise, weather affects visibility. Rain changes landscapes. Water levels rise and fall. Leaves disappear. What could not be seen in one season may become visible in another. That is one reason investigators occasionally revisit locations that have already been examined. Another important aspect involves technology. Digital forensic methods continue improving. Devices that reveal little information 1 year may provide additional insights when examined again using newer techniques. Investigators sometimes preserve evidence specifically because future advances may allow them to recover information that current tools cannot. Although authorities have not publicly detailed every forensic step in Nancy's case, this broader investigative practice explains why evidence is rarely considered permanently exhausted. It remains available for future review. Public interest has also remained unusually strong. Community members continue discussing Nancy's disappearance. True crime audiences revisit timelines. Journalists occasionally return to the story whenever new information emerges or significant milestones pass. That continued attention has both advantages and disadvantages. It helps keep Nancy's name in public view. Someone who missed earlier coverage may recognize a photograph today. At the same time, investigators must sort credible information from repeated rumors that circulate online. A claim repeated hundreds of times does not become true simply because it is widely shared. Experienced detectives return to documented evidence, not popularity, not speculation, evidence. As 6 months have now passed, investigators appear to be standing at an important crossroads. They know what has been confirmed. They know what has been ruled out. And they know which questions remain unanswered. Sometimes that combination creates the conditions for an unexpected breakthrough. Other times it demands even greater patience. For Nancy's loved ones, patience is probably the hardest part. Waiting without certainty can feel longer than time itself. Yet history reminds us that missing person investigations have been solved after far longer periods than 6 months. Some answers arrived after 1 year, others after several years. In some cases, one overlooked witness changed everything. In others, a single recovered record connected pieces that had remained separated for months. Whether Nancy Guthrie's investigation follows one of those paths remains unknown. What is clear is that the search for answers has not ended. Instead, it has become more focused, more deliberate, more dependent on careful review than dramatic developments. And as investigators continue working through every verified detail once again, one possibility remains very much alive. The answer may not be hiding in a brand new clue at all. It may be waiting inside something that has been in the case file since the very first week, only now viewed from an entirely different angle. By the time a missing person investigation reaches 6 months, people naturally begin asking a difficult question. What happens now? The answer is often less dramatic than many expect. There is rarely one moment when investigators suddenly declare they know exactly what happened. More often, progress comes in small steps. A record is reviewed again. A witness remembers another detail. A tip is verified or ruled out. Piece by piece, detectives continue building the picture until the evidence points in a clear direction. That is where Nancy Guthrie's case stands today. Despite months of searching, interviews, and public attention, authorities have not publicly announced a definitive explanation for her disappearance. Details remain limited, and investigators have continued asking anyone with credible information to contact them. For many people following the case, that lack of certainty is frustrating. Human nature pushes us toward conclusions. We want an ending. We want the mystery resolved. But real investigations do not always move at the pace of public expectation. Sometimes the most honest answer is simply this: we do not know yet. That answer may feel unsatisfying, but it is often the most accurate one. According to investigators in many long-running missing person cases, there comes a point where the investigation becomes less about finding new evidence and more about understanding the evidence that already exists. Every confirmed movement, every verified conversation, every documented sighting, every search area, each one is evaluated again. One reason this approach matters is because evidence rarely exists in isolation. Imagine a witness who remembered seeing an unfamiliar vehicle several months ago. At first, investigators may not have had any way to connect that observation to the rest of the case. Months later, another witness independently mentions a similar vehicle. Then surveillance footage from a nearby location appears to show something matching that description. Individually, none of those pieces proves anything. Together, they may point investigators toward a new line of inquiry. That is how many investigations develop, not through dramatic discoveries, through careful connections. That brings us back to the people closest to Nancy. Throughout these 6 months, her loved ones have continued carrying a burden that is difficult to put into words. Every holiday, every family gathering, every ordinary day serves as another reminder that someone important is missing. For families living through this kind of uncertainty, life becomes divided into 2 parts: before the disappearance and after it. The calendar continues moving forward. Birthdays arrive, seasons change, neighbors go about their routines. But emotionally, many families describe feeling as though time stopped on the day their loved one vanished. That emotional reality explains why they continue speaking publicly. Not because they enjoy attention, not because they believe every interview will solve the case, but because every interview is another opportunity for someone, somewhere, to hear Nancy's name and remember something they had forgotten. Perhaps they recognize a vehicle. Perhaps they remember an unusual conversation. Perhaps they finally decide to report something they dismissed months earlier. History shows that these moments happen. Investigators often say people come forward long after a crime or disappearance because circumstances change. Friendships end, relationships break down, consciences become heavier. Someone who stayed silent at the beginning may eventually decide they can no longer do so. That possibility remains one of the strongest reasons detectives continue encouraging the public to share credible information, even many months after a case begins. Another lesson from long-running investigations is that patience should never be mistaken for inactivity. Detectives may spend weeks examining records that produce no immediate answers. Then one small discovery changes the direction of the investigation. A timeline becomes clearer. A witness account gains support. A previously overlooked detail suddenly fits. These moments rarely happen by accident. They happen because investigators were willing to revisit the basics instead of assuming the first review caught everything. That approach appears especially important in Nancy Guthrie's investigation. Rather than chasing every rumor that appears online, the emphasis has remained on verified evidence. Documented timelines, recorded interviews, physical searches, digital records, confirmed facts. Those are the foundations that allow investigators to distinguish reliable information from speculation. In today's world, social media can spread theories within minutes. Some are thoughtful, some are based on misunderstandings, others have no factual support at all. For investigators, popularity does not determine credibility. Evidence does. That difference cannot be emphasized enough. A theory repeated thousands of times online is still only a theory unless it is supported by verifiable facts. That is why law enforcement agencies often avoid commenting on every rumor. Doing so would consume valuable investigative time and could unintentionally validate claims that have no supporting evidence. Instead, detectives continue following the evidence wherever it leads. Sometimes that path is straightforward. Sometimes it circles back to places already examined. Sometimes it leads nowhere at all. But each path teaches investigators something. Even eliminating one possibility brings them closer to understanding what actually happened. As the 6-month mark passes, another reality becomes increasingly important. Public attention fades. News stories replace old ones. News broadcasts move on. That shift can make families feel as though their loved one's case is being forgotten. Yet many successful investigations have benefited from renewed public awareness months or even years later. A milestone anniversary, a fresh media report, a community event. Any one of these can place a case back in front of someone who finally recognizes a critical detail. That is one reason continued coverage matters. Not because it guarantees answers, because it creates opportunities. Today, Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains exactly what investigators have treated it as from the beginning, an active search for the truth. The unanswered questions are still significant. Where did Nancy go after her last confirmed movements? Did someone see something they never realized was important? Is there a piece of evidence that has not yet been properly connected to the rest of the timeline? Those questions remain open. Until investigators can answer them with confidence, speculation should never replace facts. Cases like this remind us that every missing person's story extends far beyond headlines. Behind every investigation is a family waiting for answers, friends hoping for a phone call, neighbors wondering if there was something they overlooked, investigators carrying the responsibility of finding the truth, even when that process takes far longer than anyone expected. As difficult as 6 months may seem, history offers reason to remain hopeful. Many missing person investigations have reached turning points long after public attention began fading. Some breakthroughs came from improved forensic analysis. Others came from one witness finally deciding to speak. Others resulted from investigators returning to old evidence with fresh perspective. No one can say today whether Nancy Guthrie's case will follow one of those paths. The facts available publicly simply do not allow that conclusion. What we can say is this: the investigation continues. The questions remain. And somewhere, someone may already know the piece of information that could finally bring clarity to Nancy's family, and to everyone who has followed this case. If you have been following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, what part of the investigation stands out to you the most? Do you think returning to the original timeline is the right approach, or is there another aspect of the case you believe deserves closer attention? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, keeping in mind that this is an active investigation and that verified facts matter most. If you appreciate careful, fact-based coverage of ongoing investigations, please consider subscribing. It helps us continue following cases like this with the patience, balance, and attention they deserve. Thank you for watching, and we'll continue following this investigation as new verified information becomes available.